In the world of the Elder Scrolls, a dragon cannot truly die. You can stab one, burn one, drop a mountain on one, and it will simply come back, because a dragon is not really alive the way you and I are alive, and death has almost no hold on it. Every army that ever fought them learned this the hard way. There is only one thing in all of creation that can kill a dragon and make it stay dead, and it is not a sword, and it is not a spell, and it is not even a god. It is a single kind of person. They look completely ordinary, and they bleed like anyone else. But when one of them stands over a dead dragon, the dragon's soul comes apart and pours into them, and that dragon is gone forever, beyond the reach of the very being who made it. These people are called Dragonborn, and the strange part is that for almost the entire history of the Empire, the millions of people ruled by the Dragonborn had absolutely no idea what the word actually meant. So this is the question the whole video is built around, and it is a much bigger question than it sounds. What actually makes someone a Dragonborn? Because the obvious answer, the one almost everyone gives, is that it runs in the family, that it is a bloodline, that you are born one because your parents were. The Empire of Tamriel was ruled for thousands of years by what everyone called the Dragonborn Emperors, one dynasty after another. So, of course, people assumed it got passed down like a crown or a title or the color of your eyes. But when you actually go through the lore, source by source, that answer falls apart almost immediately, and what is left underneath it is a lot stranger and a lot harder to pin down. The game world itself does not fully agree on the answer, which is the interesting part, because the most respected and most honest text ever written on the subject openly admits that nobody knows. So, we are going to walk through every major Dragonborn the lore gives us, from the very first one ever recorded to the very last, and we are going to test the popular theories against each of them, one at a time, until only one explanation is still standing. And the thing that explanation points to is honestly a little disturbing once you actually see it clearly. To understand what makes a Dragonborn, you first have to understand what a dragon is in this world, because the two things are tied together so tightly that you cannot explain one without the other. In most fantasy stories, a dragon is just a very large, very dangerous animal, a giant lizard with wings that hoards gold and breathes fire and gets slain by a knight at the end. The Elder Scrolls dragons are nothing like that. They are not animals at all. They are far closer to gods than to beasts. Every single dragon in the setting is a piece of one divine being named Akatosh, who is the chief of the gods worshipped across most of Tamriel, and who is also called the father of dragons and the god of time itself. The lore is fairly direct about this. Dragon souls are described as fragments or splinters broken off from Akatosh, so that each dragon is in a sense a small shard of the god of time wearing a body. That is why dragons are immortal in a way that nothing else in the world is. They do not age, they do not get sick, and even when their body is completely destroyed, the soul simply keeps existing, because a piece of the god of time does not really fall out of time. The dragon Parthernax, who matters a great deal later in this story, even calls Akatosh his father in plain language, which tells you this is not some metaphor the dragons invented to feel important. They genuinely consider themselves children of the time god, and by the rules of this universe, they are right. For a long stretch of the world's ancient prehistory, in the age called the Merethic era, these beings ruled openly. They did not hide in caves. They sat on top of the world as living gods, and kept mortals as worshippers and servants, and a whole religion grew up around serving them, which is usually called the dragon cult. The dragons did not bother running their empire themselves day to day. Instead, they appointed human priests to do it for them, the dragon priests, who governed the people in the dragon's name, collected the worship, and enforced the dragon's will. In exchange, these priests were given unnatural power and unnaturally long life, and they wore great ornate masks that were said to grant them magic, masks that still turn up as some of the most dangerous artifacts in Skyrim thousands of years later. So the picture you should have of that ancient age is not knights versus monsters. It is an entire civilization of people kneeling to immortal gods who happened to have wings, with a class of masked human middle managers keeping everyone in line. Now here is where the Dragonborn comes in, and here is the actual stakes of the whole thing. When a Dragonborn kills a dragon and absorbs its soul, that soul does not keep existing and it does not move on. It merges into the Dragonborn and becomes part of them, permanently, and the dragon it came from can never be raised again, not by any necromancer and not even by Alduin the World Eater, who we will get to. The lore spells this out clearly, that removing the soul severs the dragon's immortality and puts it forever beyond the reach of any magic that could bring it back. So a Dragonborn is the single loophole in an otherwise unbreakable law of the universe. Everything else can only knock a dragon down for a while. A Dragonborn can end one for good. And the dragons understand this perfectly, which is why this kind of person frightens and enrages them more than anything else that exists. So already, before we have even met a single named Dragonborn, we have our first real clue. Whatever a Dragonborn is, it is something that can take a fragment of a god into itself and contain it without being torn apart. That is not a normal thing a mortal body should be able to survive, and it is going to matter for every theory we test. It is worth slowing down on Akatosh for a moment, because everything in this story flows back to him, and understanding him is the key that unlocks the ending. Akatosh is the god of time, and in the elven traditions he is known by another name, Auriel, the same god seen through a different culture's eyes. The lore generally treats him as the first of the gods to take a stable form at the very beginning of creation, the fixed point that made time and the ordered world possible at all. He is not just one god among many. He is closer to the load-bearing pillar that the rest of reality leans on, and his children, the dragons, inherited a piece of his nature. This is why the dragon language and the voice, the Thuum, are so central to all of this. To a dragon, speaking is not just talking. A dragon's word is literally an expression of its will against the world, and when a dragon speaks in its own tongue, reality tends to obey. That is what a shout actually is. A word of the dragon language spoken with enough force and meaning that the world rearranges itself to match it. A dragon shouting fire is not casting a spell the way a wizard does. It is stating, in the oldest language there is, that there will be fire. And there is. The whole reason mortals later learn to do this is that it can, with enormous effort, be taught. But for a dragon, it is as natural as breathing, because a dragon is made of the same divine stuff that the language describes. This is the connection that ties the dragons and the Dragonborn together at the deepest level, and it is the thing to keep in the back of your mind for the rest of the video. A dragon is a fragment of the time god in a draconic body, and it speaks the world's oldest language as a birthright. A Dragonborn, as we are about to see, can do the exact same thing in a mortal body, can take the soul of a dragon and absorb its knowledge of these words instantly without studying, the way the dragon itself knew them. That should not be possible unless the Dragonborn and the dragon are, at some level, the same kind of thing. Hold on to that, because the lore is going to confirm it in the most direct way imaginable by the end. For most of the Merethic era, the arrangement held. The dragons ruled, the priests governed, and the mortals served, because there was no way to fight an enemy that could not be killed. But eventually, the people of Skyrim, the ancient Nords, rose up against their dragon masters in what is remembered as the Dragon War, and the way they managed to do it changed everything that came after. The dragons were led, as they always are, by Alduin, the World Eater, who is the firstborn and most powerful of all of Akatosh's draconic children. Under Alduin, the dragons were not gentle gods. They were tyrants, and the war was brutal and one-sided for a long time, because the mortals had courage and numbers, but no real weapon against immortal enemies. What turned the war was a betrayal from inside the dragon's own ranks. One dragon, named Paarthurnax, who was Alduin's own lieutenant and, in the dragon's way of speaking, his brother, switched sides. The Nords say he was moved to do this by the goddess Kain, their goddess of the storm and the wind, and what he did was teach mortals the one thing that could even the odds. He taught a small group of human heroes how to use the voice, the Thuum, the dragon's own divine power, so that for the first time mortals could fight back with the same kind of weapon the dragons used against them. The first humans he taught are remembered as the first tongues, and 3 of them in particular led the rebellion, a warrior named Gormlaith Goldenhilt, a warrior named Hakon One Eye, and a wise one named Felder the Old. But even with the voice, they hit a wall, and the wall was Alduin himself. The ordinary dragons could be beaten down with the Thuum, but Alduin was something more, and they simply could not kill him. So the three heroes did something desperate and brilliant. They had, or created, a shout of their own, a forbidden one called Dragonrend, and it is one of the strangest weapons in the entire setting, because of what it actually does. Dragonrend forces the concept of mortality, the raw idea of death and ending, into the mind of an immortal dragon. A dragon, being a piece of the deathless time god, cannot truly understand death, has never had to, and Dragonrend essentially screams that idea at the dragon so violently that it staggers the creature, drags it down out of the sky, and momentarily cripples it with a feeling it was never built to feel. A mortal weapon made of nothing but the knowledge of dying, used against a being that was never supposed to die. There is something almost cruel and almost poetic about it, that the thing which makes mortals weak, the fact that we end, was turned into the only blade sharp enough to cut a god. Even that was not enough to destroy Alduin though. So at the peak of the tallest mountain in Skyrim, the throat of the world, the heroes used Dragonrend to pin Alduin down, and then Felder the Old used an Elder Scroll, one of the impossible reality-bending artifacts that exist outside of normal time, to cast Alduin forward through time itself. They did not kill him, because they could not. They essentially threw him into the future and slammed the door, removing him from their age entirely and sending him hurtling towards some distant later date with no destination. The disappearance of Alduin broke the back of the dragon armies and ended the Dragon War, and mortals were finally free of their winged gods. But Feldir knew, even in the moment of victory, that they had not won so much as delayed. They had taken the World Eater out of time, and time eventually always comes back around. It is worth being very clear about who Alduin actually is, because his nature is one of the keys to the unsettling part at the end, and people often mistake him for just a big evil dragon, which badly undersells what he is. Alduin is the firstborn of Akatosh, and he is the World Eater, and that title is not a boast, it is a job. According to Nordic belief, Alduin's actual purpose, his entire reason for existing, is to destroy the world at the end of its allotted time, so that a new world can be born in its place. The setting runs on a cycle, a great wheel of creation and destruction, and these world cycles are sometimes called kalpas. Alduin is the one who is meant to eat each world when its time is up, devouring it completely so the next can begin from the ashes. He is, in the most literal sense the universe has, the end of the world, given a body. This is why so many different cultures across the setting have their own version of him under their own names, because they are all describing the same cosmic force from different angles. He resembles the serpent god Satakal of the desert peoples, who eternally eats and remakes the world. He resembles a destroyer god the catfolk know, and a world devourer the people of Solstheim fear at the end of time. They are not separate monsters. They are all glimpses of the same thing, the destruction that is built into the design of reality. But here is the crucial twist, the thing that makes Alduin a villain instead of just a force of nature. He went off script. Paarthurnax, his own brother who turned against him, says something very precise about why Alduin had to be opposed. Alduin doomed himself, Paarthurnax says, by improperly claiming the lordship of Akatosh. In other words, Alduin was supposed to be the destroyer in service of the cycle, a piece of his father's will doing its proper job, and instead he decided he wanted to be the master rather than the servant. He wanted to rule the world as a god king rather than end it on schedule, and in doing so he set himself above and against his own father's design. The dragons themselves see Alduin as distinct from Akatosh because of this, see him as something that broke from what it was meant to be. So Alduin is not evil because he ends worlds. Ending worlds is his sacred function. He became the enemy when he stopped doing that job and tried to make himself the permanent ruler of a world that was supposed to keep turning. Keep that in mind, because it is going to make the ending of his story very strange indeed. There is one more thing about Alduin that has to be understood, before we meet our first Dragonborn, because it is the thing that makes a Dragonborn necessary in the first place. And most people only half notice it while they are playing. We said at the very start that a dragon cannot truly die, that you can destroy its body and the soul simply endures. Alduin is the living proof of what that actually means in practice, because Alduin does not only eat the world, he raises the dead. When the ancient Nords won the Dragon War, they did not really kill most of the dragons they beat. They could not. They struck the bodies down and buried them in great mounds of earth scattered across Skyrim. Standing stones ringed around them, and for thousands of years, those mounds sat there looking like ordinary ancient graves, while the immortal souls inside them simply waited, unable to die and unable to rise on their own. And then Alduin came back, and the people of Skyrim learned the horrifying truth, which is that the graves were never graves at all, they were holding cells. Early in the last Dragonborn story, you actually get to watch it happen. Alduin descends on one of these mounds near a place called Kynesgrove, and he shouts. And the shout he uses is one that commands flesh itself to come back against the pull of time. The earth tears open, the bones climb out, the flesh knits itself back over them, and a dragon that had been dead for thousands of years stands up whole and alive and furious, greeting Alduin as its overlord and asking whether the time has finally come to take back the world. Alduin, the firstborn of the Time God, can reach into the past of a dead thing and drag it back into the present, because to a being made of time, death is not a wall, it is just another direction to move. Now sit with what that does to the whole problem, because it is bleaker than it first looks. It means the dragon threat is not a war you can ever actually win by fighting. Every dragon a hero strikes down can be stood right back up by Alduin with 3 words. You could field the greatest army in history, kill every dragon in the world, lose thousands of lives doing it, and Alduin could undo the entire victory in an afternoon by flying from mound to mound and breathing the flesh back onto the bones. The ordinary tools of war, swords and spells and courage and numbers, are not just weak against dragons, they are pointless against them in the long run. Because the enemy treats death as a minor inconvenience and simply refuses to stay beaten. Against an enemy that resurrects, ordinary killing is meaningless. And that is the exact gap a Dragonborn fills. The reason this one specific kind of person is the hinge the whole world turns on. When a Dragonborn absorbs a dragon's soul, that dragon does not go into a holding cell to wait for Alduin. It is gone. The soul is consumed, pulled out of the cycle entirely, placed somewhere even the firstborn of the time God cannot reach to drag it back. No shout will restore flesh to a soul that no longer exists. So a Dragonborn is not just a strong warrior who happens to be good at fighting dragons. A Dragonborn is the single answer in all of creation to an otherwise unsolvable problem. The one and only way to turn the endless, self-renewing plague of immortal dragons into something that can finally, permanently end. Everyone else can fight the war forever and never finish it. Only a Dragonborn can actually win it. Which makes you wonder, even more than before, where a power like that could possibly come from, and why it only ever seems to show up at the exact moment the world cannot survive without it. So now, finally, we meet our first actual Dragonborn, and he comes from this same ancient age, before anyone had a political reason to twist the meaning of the word. His name was Mirak, and his story is incredibly useful precisely because it is so old and so clean, untouched by all the royal mythology that would later cover the term over. Mirak lived in the Meretic era, back when the dragons still ruled, and he was a dragon priest, one of those masked human governors who served the dragons and ran their temples in exchange for power and long life. By all accounts, he was among the most powerful and most respected of all of them, ruling over the island of Solstheim in the dragon's name. The word Dragonborn did not even exist in Mirak's time, and would not come into use for thousands of years yet, but every source that writes about him agrees that he was the first true Dragonborn in all of history, and the reason they can say that with confidence is because of what he could do. Mirak could use the voice, which on its own was not unheard of, but he could also do the thing that truly defines a Dragonborn, the thing we opened the whole video with. He could take the soul of a dragon directly into himself. At some point, Mirak stopped being a loyal servant and went looking for forbidden knowledge, and he found it through a bargain with Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric prince of forbidden knowledge, a being who rules a realm that is essentially an endless library containing every secret that has ever existed. Mora taught Miraak a shout called Bend Will, which let him override the will of a dragon and force it to obey him. And armed with that, plus his Dragonborn ability to devour dragon souls and make their deaths permanent, Miraak turned on his own masters and began killing the very gods he had served. 3 other dragon priests joined him as his most powerful followers, and for a moment it looked as though he might pull off something nobody had ever done. This was the first time in history the dragons learned that one of their own servants could truly destroy them, and it badly shook them. It did not work. The dragon struck back and burned his great temple to the ground, and there was a loyal dragon priest, a figure named Valok, who fought Miraak directly. The legends say that battle was so violent it tore the island of Solstheim away from the mainland of Skyrim, which is why Solstheim is a separate island today. Right as Miraak was about to be defeated, his patron Hermaeus Mora reached into the world and pulled him out of it entirely, dragging him into the endless library to serve as his champion. And there Miraak stayed, trapped, scheming, and not quite dead, for thousands upon thousands of years, which becomes very important at the very end of this story, when the first Dragonborn finally comes face to face with the last one. For our investigation though, Miraak hands us something priceless right at the start. He proves that the original meaning of Dragonborn had nothing whatsoever to do with being an emperor, nothing to do with a royal family, and nothing to do with a holy covenant, because none of those things even existed yet. The first Dragonborn was a servant who learned to eat the souls of gods. That is the raw, original definition, stripped of every layer of politics that would get glued onto it later. A Dragonborn, at the very beginning, was simply a mortal who could take a dragon's soul. Remember that, because by the end, the word will have collected a completely different meaning, and we will have to figure out which one is actually true. Now, here is a place where an enormous number of people get confused, and it is worth being very careful about, because it is the difference between two things that look nearly identical from the outside but are not the same at all. Miraak used a voice. The Dragonborn in Skyrim uses the voice. So people very naturally assume that being able to shout is what makes you Dragonborn. It is not, and the lore is consistently careful about this distinction even when the fans are not. Remember that Paarthurnax taught ordinary mortals to use the Thu'um during the Dragon War. That means the voice is, at its root, a teachable skill. A human being with enough discipline, enough talent, and enough years of brutal study can learn to shout, and over the centuries, plenty of them did. There is a whole monastic tradition built around exactly that, which we will get to in a minute. But learning to shout the slow way, through study and meditation, does not make a person Dragonborn, no matter how strong their voice gets. A trained master of the voice has to learn each shout the hard way, often a single word at a time, gathering the words from ancient carved walls and grinding away at them for years to truly understand them. A Dragonborn does none of that. A Dragonborn pulls the knowledge straight out of a dead dragon's soul and simply knows it, instantly and completely, the way the dragon itself knew it, because the Dragonborn already has a piece of dragon inside them and the language is, in a sense, their mother tongue. You can see this difference in the most ordinary moment of the Skyrim game itself, if you know what you are looking at. Scattered across the world, there are ancient carved stones called word walls, each one holding a single word of power from one of these shouts. Because in the dragon language, a full shout is usually made of 3 separate words that build on each other, growing stronger as you learn more of them. A normal student of the voice who stumbled onto one of those walls would get nothing from it but old carvings, and would have to study for years to even begin to understand a single word. The Dragonborn walks up to a word wall, and the word simply flows off the stone and into them, learned in an instant, glowing as it goes, because the language is already theirs at the level of the soul, and they are only remembering it rather than learning it. Same wall, same word, completely different experience depending on what you are. That is the gap between studying a language and being born already speaking it. That is the line that separates the two, and it is a clean one. Learning the voice is a skill you acquire. Being Dragonborn is a condition of your soul that you already are, and the cleanest proof that these are genuinely different things is sitting right there in Mirak's own story. The three heroic tongues who eventually fought Alduin, the ones who could already use the voice well enough to wage a war with it, actually went to Mirak and begged him, specifically as a Dragonborn, to help them. And he refused them and went off to start his own selfish rebellion instead. Sit with that for a second. The humans who could merely shout still needed the one who was actually Dragonborn. They had the skill. They did not have whatever he had. So whatever made Mirak special, it was plainly not just that he could use the voice, because the people kneeling and asking for his help could use the voice too. It was something underneath that, something they did not possess and could not learn. The voice is the most common trap in this whole question, and we can throw it out right now. It is not the answer. Now, if the mortals of the Empire spent thousands of years arguing about whether a Dragonborn was a bloodline or a title or a holy office, there is one group that never had any confusion about it at all, and it is worth hearing their answer, because they are the experts, and that group is the dragons. The dragons have always known exactly what a Dragonborn is. They have a word for it in their own ancient language, and that word, more than any human text, gets us most of the way to the truth. The word is Dovahkin. It is the dragon tongue name for a Dragonborn, and the way it breaks down tells you everything. In the dragon language, Dova means dragon, and Kin means born or child, so at the simplest level, Dovahkin just means dragon child, or one born of the dragons. But the dragons describe what that actually is far more precisely than the humans ever did, and their definition is the same in every source. A Dovahkin is a mortal born with the body of an ordinary man or woman, but carrying the blood and the soul of a dragon, not blessed with dragon-like powers, not gifted a fragment of dragon magic, born with the actual soul of a dragon riding inside a mortal body. The dragons even have a separate term for the substance itself, which translates as dragon blood, the same thing the human covenant called the dragon blood, without ever really understanding what it physically was. To a Dragonborn is not a king or a hero or a chosen one. A Dragonborn is, very simply, one of their own kind that happens to be wearing the wrong body. There is a lovely detail buried in how the word is spoken, too. Dragon names in this world are always made of three separate words of power, three shouts stacked together, which is why a name like Alduin can itself be shouted to summon the dragon who wears it. And when the Greybeards bestow recognition on the new Dragonborn, they pronounce the word as three distinct pieces: Dov, A, Kien, treating it exactly like a dragon's name rather than an ordinary mortal word. Read that way, with the middle piece meaning something like hunter, the title shifts into born hunter of dragonkind, which is a chillingly perfect description of a being that exists to track down immortal dragons and end them permanently. The dragons named their own appointed killer in their own tongue and build the meaning right into the sound of it. You can hear how the dragons feel about this in the way they react to the last Dragonborn. When the Blades Archivist describes the prophecy, he explains that there is one being the dragons genuinely fear above all others, and in the dragon's own language, that being is the Dovahkin, fear from creatures that consider themselves gods. And yet the very first time Alduin himself lays eyes on the new Dragonborn, the World Eater is openly unimpressed, sneering that he can see nothing of the dragon about this person at all, just a small mortal pretending at greatness. He learns better very quickly. That gap between Alduin's contempt at first sight and the deep dread the older dragons carry is the whole story in miniature. From the outside, a Dragonborn looks like nothing, an ordinary person who bleeds like anyone else. Exactly as we said at the very start. On the inside, by the dragon's own reckoning, that ordinary person is carrying the soul of a dragon, which is the one thing in all the world that can hunt them past the edge of death. So before we even finish the investigation, the experts have already handed us the answer. Whatever a Dragonborn is, it is, at the level of the soul, a dragon. We just have to figure out where a mortal could possibly get a dragon's soul, and that road leads to exactly one place. That monastic tradition we keep brushing past is worth telling properly, because it explains why the Dragonborn matters so deeply to the people of Skyrim in particular, and it ends on a belief that lines up almost perfectly with the conclusion of this whole video. It is the story of how the voice went from a weapon of war to a religion of peace. For a long time after the Dragon War, the Nords used the voice the way you would expect, as a weapon. They shouted their enemies off battlefields and were loud and proud and aggressive about it. Then came a catastrophe at a place called Red Mountain, in a great battle in the land of Morrowind, where a Nord army was crushed, and one of the greatest voice users of that whole age, a man named Jurgen Windcaller, walked away from that defeat with a question gnawing at him that he could not let go of. He could not understand how warriors carrying the power of the voice could possibly have lost. So he went silent, and he stayed silent. And he spent about 7 years turning that single question over in his mind, and at the end of it he arrived at an answer that reshaped Nord culture forever. He decided that the Nords had grown arrogant with the voice. He decided they had become exactly like the dragons they had once overthrown, drunk on their own power, abusing a sacred gift to win petty wars of conquest, and that their defeat at Red Mountain was the natural result of that arrogance. So Jurgen Windcaller founded a new philosophy, the way of the voice, which taught that the Tuum should be used to honor the gods and seek inner peace and enlightenment, almost never as a tool of war. The story goes that when 17 other master tongues challenged him to a shouting duel to prove him wrong, Jurgen simply absorbed and swallowed every shout they hurled at him for 3 straight days until they had completely exhausted themselves, and then, defeated and humbled, those 17 masters followed him up the mountain to become his first students. Those students became the Greybeards, an order of monks who live in near total silence at the monastery of High Hrothgar, high on the throat of the world, the same mountain where Alduin had been banished, refusing to use their world-shaking power for anything but worship and meditation. Their voices become so strong through this practice that they can no longer speak normally to outsiders without causing harm, which is why they keep their silence. And here is the rule that comes out of all of this, the rule that matters most for our question. The Greybeards believe the voice should almost never be used for fighting, with one single exception, a circumstance they call true need, meaning a genuine emergency for the entire world. They are so strict about this that they will usually not even use their power to defend themselves. But there is one event that always automatically counts as true need, one circumstance where every rule is suspended and violence becomes not just allowed but expected, the arrival of a Dragonborn. To the Greybeards, a Dragonborn appearing in the world is itself the proof that the world is in mortal danger, that something is coming which only a Dragonborn could stop. They do not see the Dragonborn as merely a powerful warrior. They see the Dragonborn as a warning, a divine alarm bell, a sign sent by the gods themselves that the world has reached a crisis it cannot survive on its own. That belief is going to turn out to be exactly correct, and we will come back to it. Now we reach the moment where the word Dragonborn picks up its second meaning, the one that almost completely buried the first, and the one that confused everyone for thousands of years afterward. And it begins, of all places, with a slave. In the early First Era, long after the dragons had been overthrown, the elves called the Aelites ruled the heartland of Tamriel, the region of Cyrodiil at the center of the continent, and they kept the early humans there as slaves, and the conditions were as bad as that sounds, full of cruelty and Daedra worshipping rituals. The woman who led the slave rebellion against them is remembered as Saint Alessia, the slave queen, and she is one of the single most important figures in the entire setting, because she did not just free her people. She founded the first great human empire at the heart of the world, and according to the lore, she did it with direct help from a god. The story, as the holy texts tell it, is that Alessia prayed to Akatosh, the time god, the father of dragons, in her people's darkest hour, and Akatosh looked down with pity on the suffering of humankind, and he drew precious blood from his own heart and blessed Alessia with it. This was not a vague blessing of the kind gods are always handing out. He put a piece of himself, the same divine dragon substance the dragons themselves are made of, into her and her bloodline, and in doing so he made a bargain. This bargain is called the Covenant of Akatosh, and it is the foundation that the entire empire would be built on for the next 4,000 years. The terms were these: so long as Alessia's descendants stayed true to that dragon blood, Akatosh and his fellow gods would maintain a barrier between the mortal world and the realms of oblivion, holding back the Daedra, the demonic princes, and their endless hordes, so that mortals would never again have to fear being overrun by the armies of hell. To seal and symbolize the bargain, Alessia was given a holy object, the Amulet of Kings, and the first of the sacred flames, called the Dragon Fires, was lit in the temple of the One in the Imperial City. And this is the precise moment the word Dragonborn enters the language in its second sense. Those blessed by Akatosh with the dragon blood became known as Dragonborn. From that point on, only someone carrying the dragon blood could wear the Amulet of Kings, and only someone wearing it could light the dragon fires. And as long as those fires burned, the mortal world stayed sealed against invasion from oblivion. So the word now means something completely different from what it meant in Mirak's day. It is no longer about a forgotten servant who ate dragon souls in a prehistoric age. It is about a holy royal bloodline that physically holds the door of the world shut against the forces of hell. That is exactly why every legitimate ruler of the empire afterward had to be Dragonborn. It was never a fancy title for show, it was a job requirement, and the job was nothing less than preventing the apocalypse. You can see immediately why this version took over so completely. It is grand, it is political, it is tied to the throne and the gods and the literal survival of the world. So for thousands of years, when people heard the word Dragonborn, they pictured emperors and amulets and sacred fires, and almost nobody remembered the older, rawer meaning about stealing the souls of dragons. The two ideas had basically nothing in common except the word itself and the shared connection to Akatosh. And that, right there, is exactly the trap our investigation now has to climb out of, because the single most popular theory about what makes a Dragonborn comes straight out of this royal version of the story, and it is wrong. And right here, before we go any further, an honest investigation has to stop and deal with a problem, because something about these two meanings of Dragonborn does not line up, and the lore itself knows it does not line up. We have now seen two completely different kinds of Dragonborn, and at first glance, they barely seem like the same thing at all. On one side, there is Mirak, and the kind of Dragonborn the dragons themselves describe. That kind is about the soul. They are born already carrying a dragon soul, they can devour the souls of other dragons, they soak up the voice without studying, and the entire thing is a fact of what they are from birth. On the other side, there is Alessia and the royal line that followed her. That kind is about a covenant. Alessia was not born with a dragon soul as far as anyone can tell. She was a mortal slave who prayed in her people's darkest hour and was granted a drop of Akatosh's heart blood as part of a bargain to seal the gates of oblivion. And here is the part that genuinely complicates things. The part the lore is careful to leave standing. There is no clear sign that Alessia could do the defining trick. There is no tale of the slave queen swallowing the soul of a dragon the way Mirak did and the way the last Dragonborn does. Her gift seems to have been something else, something gentler and stranger, more about giving her people freedom and a sacred bloodline and a barrier against hell than about hunting dragons across the sky. So which one is the real Dragonborn? That is a fair and obvious question, and a lazy investigation would just pick one and ignore the other. But look closely and you find that the lore is not actually offering us two unrelated things that happen to share a name by accident. It is offering us two different expressions of the exact same underlying cause, and the cause is the thing both kinds have in common when you strip everything else away. Mirak's soul-devouring power and Alessia's covenant blessing both trace back, with no exceptions, to one single source, and that source is Akatosh. The dragons are splinters of Akatosh, so the soul-eating Dragonborn carries a piece of Akatosh in the form of a dragon's soul. Alessia was given blood drawn straight from the heart of Akatosh, so the Covenant Dragonborn carries a piece of Akatosh in the form of divine heart blood. Different containers, different ceremonies, different powers on the surface, but the same God underneath, poured into a mortal in two slightly different ways. The reason both are called Dragonborn is not a coincidence of language. It is because, at the only level that matters, they are made of the same divine material, the substance of the dragon god of time himself. That is why we cannot answer our question by looking at the powers, because the powers vary. One Dragonborn eats dragon souls, another founds an empire and seals oblivion, a third becomes a god, a fourth is recognized by foreign warriors the moment he speaks. If you go looking for one shared ability, you will fail, because there is not one. The only thing every single Dragonborn truly shares, across both kinds, across every era, is the source. So hold this carefully as we keep going, because it reframes the whole rest of the investigation. We are not really hunting for a power or a bloodline or a title anymore. We are hunting for the single thing that connects a soul-devouring priest, a slave queen, a god emperor, and a silent stranger, and we already know, in our gut, what that one thing is going to turn out to be. The Amulet of Kings, oddly enough, is about to give us our hardest physical proof of it. Before we knock the popular theory down, it is worth looking closely at the Amulet of Kings itself, because the object is much weirder than it first appears, and its weirdness is another clue. People tend to imagine it as just a fancy royal necklace, a crown jewel. It is not. The central stone of the amulet, a great red diamond called the Chim El Adabal, is actually an enormous and ancient soul gem, a vessel made to hold and contain souls, and the lore describes it as containing the divine power of Akatosh and being tied to the time god in a very direct, very literal way. It is, in effect, a piece of a god kept in a stone, hung around a mortal's neck. There are even competing legends about where that red stone came from, and both of them are revealing. One version says it is exactly what the Covenant claims, a crystallized drop of Akatosh's own heart's blood, the literal blessing he gave Alessia, made solid. Another, older and stranger version traces it back to the very beginning of the world, claiming it formed from a single drop of the blood of a different god entirely, spilled at the dawn of creation, and that the stone itself is an ancient relic of elven make, only later being given to Alessia by Akatosh. Either way, the common thread is the same. This is divine blood, the blood of a god, turned into a stone that can hold a soul, and the amulet behaves in ways that ordinary jewelry does not. The lore says plainly that only someone with the dragon blood can even wear it. On anyone else, anyone who is not truly Dragonborn, the amulet simply will not stay on. It slips off their neck, as if the object itself can tell the difference and refuses to be worn by a pretender. Stranger still, the soul of each reigning emperor was said to be enshrined inside that central stone during the coronation ritual, the same ritual that involved the dragon fires and the covenant, so that the amulet slowly accumulated the souls of a long line of god-blooded rulers, one after another, an oversoul of emperors layered inside a single gem. So this object is not a symbol of being Dragonborn. It is closer to a test for it, and a battery for it, an item that physically detects the dragon blood and physically stores it. The fact that it can tell a true Dragonborn from a fake one, all on its own, is going to matter when we ask what the dragon blood actually is, because whatever it is real enough that a stone can sense its presence. Before we knock the bloodline theory down, there is one event that has to be told here, because it is the single best demonstration of just how dangerous it is for mortals to get too close to the dragon god, and it grew directly out of Alessia's own religion. It is also, hands down, one of the strangest things that has ever happened in the entire setting, and most people who play these games never hear about it at all. After Alessia founded her empire on the dragon blood, a religious movement sprang up around her memory called the Alessian Order, and over the centuries, a faction inside it curdled into something fanatical. This faction was called the Marukati Selective, and they had a problem with their own god. The thing that gnawed at them was this. Akatosh, the time god the whole empire was built on, was openly admitted to be the very same being the elves worshipped as Ariel, their high god. To these human zealots, who hated the elves with a passion after generations of elven slavery, the idea that their pure human time god was secretly also the elves' god was unbearable. So they decided to do something about it. Not to argue about it, not to write angry pamphlets about it. They decided to reach up into the heavens and physically cut the elven parts out of the god of time himself to surgically purify Akatosh by force until he was no longer Oriel. What they actually did, according to the surviving accounts, sounds like a fever dream, and yet it is treated as real history that every culture in the world remembers. The secret masters of the Selective performed a forbidden ritual in which they reached the divine machinery underneath reality, and the great tower appeared before them, which is one of the shapes the structure of the universe takes when a mortal mind manages to look at it directly, and they danced on it. They danced on the tower until it shook and trembled and finally spoke its own secret true name, and at that the tower split into 8 pieces and time itself broke. This is what the lore calls a dragon break, and the word dragon in that phrase refers to Akatosh, because to break time is to break the dragon god. For a period the records describe as 1008 years, there was no single straight line of history at all. Every possible version of those centuries happened at once, all of them true and all of them contradicting each other. Some texts say wars were fought, others say those same wars never happened. Some say the gods walked openly among mortals, others say they did not. Even the color of the sun changes depending on who is remembering it. The whole world slept through more than 1,000 years of broken, tangled, impossible time and woke up on the other side unable to fully agree on anything that had occurred. Now think about why this belongs in a video about the Dragonborn. 2 reasons, and both of them are important. The first is what it tells you about the substance we have been chasing this whole time. The dragon blood, the piece of Akatosh, is not a gentle thing or a safe thing. It is a shard of the literal god of time, and when mortals get enough leverage on that divine machinery, they do not get a blessing, they tear a hole in history that takes 1,000 years to close. That is the raw material a Dragonborn carries inside their soul, and the second reason is the detail that ties it straight back to our subject in a way that is genuinely hard to shake once you connect it. The accounts say that the Elder Scrolls themselves, the all-seeing artifacts that can read past and future, cannot even record what happened during that broken time, that their glyphs simply vanish when a moth priest tries to read that period. But there is one object in all of creation that can still speak clearly about those lost 1,000 years, and you already know what it is, because we spent the last chapter on it. It is the Amulet of Kings, with its oversoul of emperors layered inside the red stone. The accumulated souls of the Dragonborn rulers packed into that gem can describe the unrecordable, can hold a memory that even the Elder Scrolls cannot. Which tells you, one more time and from a completely unexpected direction, that whatever lives inside a Dragonborn is operating on the same level as time itself. It is not a metaphor. The godblood in those emperors could remember a stretch of history that reality had erased. Hold that thought, because it is one more brick in the wall we are building toward the answer. So here, at last, is the popular theory laid out plainly. Dragonborn is hereditary. It runs in the blood, passed from parent to child, because the covenant itself talks about Alessia's blood and Alessia's generations, and because the empire really was ruled by one dynasty of Dragonborn after another for age upon age upon age. If your father was a Dragonborn emperor and you inherited his throne, then surely you inherited his blood right along with it. It seems completely airtight. And there is one in-world text that takes this entire question apart so thoroughly that it essentially settles the argument, and it is worth going through carefully because it is the closest thing the lore has to an honest investigation of its own subject. The text is called the Book of the Dragonborn, written by a member of the Order of Talos, a religious order devoted to the worship of the god Talos, and these are people who care about this exact question more than almost anyone alive. And the very first thing the author does is warn the reader directly that being Dragonborn is not a simple matter of heredity. The author makes a point that is easy to skip past but absolutely critical. Yes, The emperors who could wear the amulet and light the dragon fires were obviously Dragonborn, because the amulet and the fires only work for the Dragonborn, so the proof is right there in the doing of it. But that raises a question that turns the whole assumption inside out. Were these people able to light the fires because they were already born Dragonborn? Or did the blessing of Akatosh descend onto them at the moment they rightfully took the throne, making them Dragonborn precisely because they had become the rightful ruler? In other words, does the blood make the emperor, or does becoming emperor draw down the blood? And the author's answer is one of the most important lines in all of Elder Scrolls lore. The answer, the author concludes, is that it is, in their words, both and neither, a divine mystery that mortals are simply not meant to fully understand. That alone should make you deeply suspicious of the simple bloodline theory. But then the author goes much further and just starts listing counterexamples, and they are devastating. First, the early rulers of the Cyrodiilic Empire, Alessia's supposed unbroken line, were not all actually related to one another. The bloodline was not one continuous family at all. Second, and this one is enormous, there is no real evidence that Riemann Cyrodiil, one of the single most famous and important Dragonborn rulers in all of history, was descended from Alessia in any way. The legends that claim he was mostly date from his own lifetime and look an awful lot like propaganda invented to make his rule appear legitimate. And third, the absolute killer, the one that ends the debate. There is no known blood connection whatsoever between Tiber Septim, the founder of the dynasty that ruled all the way into the modern age, and any Dragonborn ruler who came before him. None at all. So let us be completely clear about what that means, because it is the turning point of the entire investigation. Three of the most important Dragonborn rulers in the whole history of the Empire, Alessia's so-called successors, Riemann Cyrodiil and Tiber Septim, do not form a single bloodline. They were not one family patiently passing the blood down through the generations. They were separate people, living in separate eras, with no proven blood link between any of them, and every single one of them was a genuine, undeniable Dragonborn who could do the things only a Dragonborn can do. The bloodline theory does not just have a hole in it. The hole is the entire thing. If Dragonborn were truly hereditary, these three people simply could not exist, and they very plainly did. So heredity is not the answer. It can be a doorway, since the child of a Dragonborn does sometimes carry the gift, which is exactly why the simplistic hereditary idea became so common in the first place. But it is not the cause. Something else is choosing these people, reaching past their parents and their family trees, and we still have to find out what. Riemann Cyrodiil deserves his own moment here, because the story of how he was recognized as a Dragonborn tells us something important about how this actually works, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the family tree. In the first era, a force of warriors crossed an entire ocean from the distant eastern continent of Akavir and invaded Tamriel. These were the Akaviri, and crucially, they were dragon hunters by trade, a people who had spent generations hunting and killing dragons in their own homeland, and they marched into Tamriel for reasons that were never fully explained even by the people who recorded it. They cut through Morrowind and Skyrim without much resistance until they finally ran into the united armies of Cyrodiil, led by a man named Reman, at a mountain crossing in the Gerol Mountains called Pale Pass. And then something happened that absolutely nobody expected. When the Akaviri heard Reman speak, when they heard his voice, they stopped fighting, and they knelt down in front of him, and they proclaimed him Dragonborn. They declared that this man was the very thing they had crossed the entire ocean to find. These hardened foreign dragon hunters, who between them had killed more dragons than perhaps anyone alive, took one listen to this man and instantly recognized him as something sacred. They had some way of knowing a Dragonborn when they encountered one, and Riemann set it off without even trying. They folded themselves into his army, became his personal guard, called the Dragon Guard, and went right back to hunting dragons across Skyrim, this time at his side. And here is a detail that stitches the whole sweep of history together. That Dragon Guard those very same Akaviri dragon hunters who knelt to Reman at Pale Pass, are the direct ancestors of the Blades, the order of bodyguards and dragon experts who serve the emperors all the way up through the events of Skyrim. The reason the Blades use Eastern Akaviri swords and build their hidden fortresses in the Eastern style thousands of years later is that they began as that exact band of dragon hunters. So really think about what Remen shows us. He had no proven blood link to Alessia. The Akaviri did not check his ancestry, did not look at any family tree, did not ask who his grandfather was. They recognized the Dragonborn in him directly, by something they could sense in his very presence and his voice. It was a quality he carried in himself, not a certificate he had inherited. And there is one more strange wrinkle the Order of Talos author throws in almost as an afterthought, but it is a beautiful one. Reman Serodil, this towering Dragonborn figure whose entire dynasty and empire are named after him, never actually took the title of emperor during his own lifetime. The Akaviri did more than anyone to build him up as a ruler. There is even an old legend that says Reman was born with that very red stone, the Chim El Adabal, already set in his forehead, marking him as God-touched from his first breath. The point is the same every time. The Dragonborn came first, recognized by those who could sense it, and the throne came after. That is the exact opposite of how the hereditary theory says it is supposed to work. If Remen is strange, the next case is the strangest in the entire setting, and it is the one that ties the Dragonborn directly back to the god they come from, so this is the one to slow down on. His name was Tiber Septim. He founded the empire that lasted all the way until the modern games, the Third Empire, and after he died, he was worshipped as a god named Talos, added as the ninth divine to the 8 gods that mortals already prayed to, a Dragonborn who became a member of the Pantheon. And his beginnings show, one final time, that this was never about blood. Before Tiber Septim was an emperor, before he was even called Tiber Septim, the legends say he was a young war hero, and at some point early in his rise, he climbed that same tallest mountain in Skyrim, the throat of the world, up to the monastery of the Greybeards at its peak, to be acknowledged by those silent monks. Remember that the Greybeards almost never speak, because their voices are so powerful that a single word can crack stone and shake the whole mountain, and that in their entire long history they have broken their silence to speak aloud only a handful of times. One of those rare, world-shaking times was to announce the destiny of Tiber Septim, to shout his name from the roof of the world and call him out as the one the world had been waiting for. When the Greybeards summon someone that way, all of Skyrim hears it. They did that for him. And just like the Akaviri kneeling to Reman, the Greybeards were not consulting a family tree. They simply recognized what he was the instant they encountered it. Now here is where Tiber Septim's story becomes genuinely bizarre, one of the great deep mysteries of the whole setting, so stay with this. Some of the most respected and most cryptic texts in the lore suggest that Talos, the god, was never actually one single man at all, but 3 men whose souls and legends were fused together into one. There was Halti Earlybeard, the young general, who is usually taken to be Tiber Septim himself. There was Zurin Arctus, his powerful battle mage and advisor. And there was Wulfharth, also called Weismer, an ancient storm-voiced Nord king from the distant past who had already died once and kept stubbornly coming back. The theory, which the lore points at through a strange and sacred concept called the enantiomorph, is that these 3 figures were merged together, with betrayal and consumption happening among them, into the single divine being remembered as Talos Stormcrown, and even that name is a clue. Talos is not a normal name. In the old god language, it means Stormcrown, which is a title far more than it is a name, a crown waiting for a worthy head. The Greybeards in Skyrim greet the Dragonborn using that exact word, Stormcrown, almost as if they are testing whether the crown fits. And since we are talking about Wulfharth, this is the perfect place for the single most obscure and strange fact in this entire video, the kind of thing buried in one ancient in-game song that almost nobody reads. Long before the time of Tiber Septim, this same Wulfharth was a living Nord king, and according to that old song, a meddling lesser god summoned the ghost of Alduin himself, the banished World Eater, to deal with Wulfharth. And the ghost of Alduin, even as a mere apparition, was so powerful that it ate the ages of nearly the entire Nord population, aging them backward until they were 6-year-old children, the king included. To save his people, the now child-sized Wulfharth had to beg the spirit of a dead Nord god to intervene, and that dead god's ghost fought Alduin's ghost on the spirit plane and won. So, even a banished ghost of the World Eater could turn a whole nation into toddlers. That is the kind of being the Dragonborn is built to fight. Anyway, the takeaway from all of this Tiber Septim strangeness is actually very clean. He was undeniably Dragonborn. He had no blood connection to any Dragonborn before him. He may not even have been a single person in the ordinary sense, and he ended up not merely blessed by a god but becoming one, ascending to join Akatosh and the others in the heavens. That is not something a bloodline can possibly hand you. That is something only the source of the dragon blood itself, Akatosh, could give, which keeps marching us back toward the same conclusion from every direction. There's a thread running through this that ties Wulfharth and Tiber Septim and the Dragonborn of Skyrim together with a single word, and it is worth pulling on, because it shows the recognition theme one more time in a way that is almost impossible to argue with. When the Greybeards finally acknowledge a Dragonborn, they do not just announce them. They give them a title, an old Nordic name that is sometimes called the name of kings in the north. The title is Weismir, the Dragon of the North. And the striking thing is who has carried that title across the ages. Wulfharth, the ancient Storm King, was called Weismir. Tiber Septim was named Weismir by the Greybeards before he ever became an emperor. And in the events of Skyrim, the Greybeards bestow that exact same title, Ysmir, Dragon of the North, on the new Dragonborn. 3 figures, scattered across thousands of years, sharing no proven blood between them, all crowned with the same word by the same silent monks. And the way the Greybeards bestow it is the recognition test laid completely bare, because of how dangerous their voices are. Remember that a Greybeard cannot speak normally without causing harm, that their full tuum can level a building. When they greet a Dragonborn formally, they do it by shouting, by hitting that person with the raw force of their combined voices, invoking the old gods Kain and Shor and the lost northern homeland of Atmora as they do it. A normal mortal standing in front of that would be torn apart. The lore says directly that Tiber Septim earned the recognition of the Greybeards precisely because he could withstand the power of their voice long enough to actually hear the prophecy they were trying to give him. That is the test. Not a family tree, not a document, not a claim. They shout at you with enough force to kill an ordinary person, and if you are still standing afterward, calmly receiving a title instead of being blown off the mountain, then you are Weismir, and the thing inside you has just been confirmed in the most direct way there is. The dragon blood does not need to be proven on paper. It survives the storm, or it does not. Now, we follow that royal bloodline all the way to its end, because how it ended is the final proof of everything the Book of the Dragonborn was carefully hinting at. For nearly 4,000 years, the Dragonborn emperors kept the dragonfires burning and the gates of oblivion sealed, exactly as the covenant promised, generation after generation. The last of these dynasties was the Septim line, founded by Tiber Septim, and it held the throne for centuries. And then it all came apart at once, in the event remembered as the Oblivion Crisis. A Daedric cult called the Mythic Dawn, serving Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Destruction, assassinated the old emperor Uriel Septim VII and hunted down and murdered his known heirs, and their goal was specific and cold. They understood the covenant perfectly. They knew that if there was no Dragonborn of the blood left alive to wear the Amulet of Kings and light the dragonfires, then the sacred barrier protecting the entire mortal world would fail, and the gates of oblivion could be thrown wide open. And it worked. With the dragonfires going dark for the first time in recorded history, with no Dragonborn left to relight them, Mehrunes Dagon's forces tore open gates to oblivion all across Tamriel and poured into the world. and for a while it genuinely looked like the end of everything. The exact catastrophe the Covenant had been built 4,000 years earlier to prevent, the very thing Akatosh had bargained with a slave queen to stop, was finally happening, because the long chain of Dragonborn rulers had been deliberately broken, but the cult missed one heir. A quiet, illegitimate son of the old emperor named Martin Septim, a man who had been living as a humble priest with no idea what he truly was. And when the moment of greatest possible need arrived, with Mehrunes Dagon himself physically tearing his way into the imperial city to destroy the world, Martin did something that ended his own dynasty and saved everyone alive in a single act. He shattered the Amulet of Kings, the holy object holding the dragon blood, and in destroying it he released the power of Akatosh sealed inside it, and turned himself into a living avatar of the time god, a manifestation of Akatosh in the form of a great fiery dragon. Some sources describe this as Martin mantling Akatosh, becoming the god by perfectly stepping into his role at the critical instant. As that avatar, he fought Mehrunes Dagon in the heart of the city, beat him, and hurled him back out of the world entirely, and then he turned to stone, frozen forever as a dragon statue at the center of the imperial city. Martin died, saving the world. And because he was the very last of the blood, and because the amulet itself was now destroyed, the bloodline of the Dragonborn emperors ended right there with him. The act sealed the gates of oblivion so completely and so permanently that the dragon fires would never need to be lit again, and could never be lit again, because there was no longer any dragon blood left to light them, and no amulet left to wear. So sit with what that means for our central question, because it is the final nail. The royal, hereditary, holy bloodline version of the Dragonborn, the one that ruled the known world for 4,000 years, the one almost everyone assumed was the only kind there was, simply ended. It died out completely and forever. And yet, as we are about to see, the Dragonborn did not end, not even close. One more would appear in the very next era, with no throne, no amulet, no covenant, and not one drop of royal blood, which is the last and clearest piece of evidence in the entire case that what makes a Dragonborn was never the throne and never the bloodline to begin with. Long before any of this came to pass, the future had already been carved into stone. Deep inside a hidden temple in Skyrim, there's a great mural called Alduin's Wall, made by those very same Akaviri dragon hunters who became the Blades, built under one of Reman's heirs. One half of the wall records the ancient defeat and banishment of Alduin in the Dragon War. The other half is a prophecy, a list of signs that would mark the return of the World Eater and the coming of one final Dragonborn, the one the lore simply calls the last Dragonborn. The prophecy lists a sequence of disasters that would precede the end, and the genuinely eerie thing is that by the time of Skyrim, every single one of them had already come true, in order. It speaks of misrule taking hold at the corners of the world, which lines up with a powerful artifact called the Staff of Chaos being broken into pieces, and an emperor being imprisoned in another realm. It speaks of a brass tower walking and time being reshaped, which lines up with a colossal mechanical god construct that was activated and caused a break in time itself. It speaks of the thrice-blessed failing and the red tower trembling, which points to events at Red Mountain in Morrowind, where 3 god kings lost their stolen divinity. It speaks of the Dragonborn ruler losing his throne and a white tower falling, which is Martin Septim and the end of the Septim line, followed later by the sacking of the great white gold tower in a devastating war against the elves. And finally, it speaks of a snow tower lying sundered, kingless and bleeding, which is Skyrim itself, torn apart by a brutal civil war after its High King was killed. The prophecy says that when the last of these signs has come to pass, the World Eater wakes and the wheel turns upon the last Dragonborn, and that is precisely what happened. The signs were fulfilled one by one across the centuries, and then Alduin returned. The World Eater that the ancient heroes had thrown forward through time finally arrived at his destination, our time, the era of Skyrim, and he began raising dragons from their ancient burial mounds and stitching their immortal souls back into their bones, building an army to do what he had always meant to do, which was consume the world. And at that very same moment, in that very same place, a Dragonborn appeared, with no royal blood, no connection to the dead septim line, no amulet, and at first not the faintest idea what they even were. They simply killed a dragon, out near the town of Whiterun, and the soul of that dragon flooded into them in front of a crowd of stunned guards, undeniable proof of what they were. And the Greybeards, high on their mountain, shouted the new Dragonborn's name across all of Skyrim, exactly as they once shouted for Tiber Septim, and the people understood that true need had come again. The Dragonborn had returned at the precise moment the world was ending, which is exactly what the Greybeards had always believed a Dragonborn was for. The last Dragonborn faced the same impossible problem the ancient heroes had faced, which is that Alduin, alone among all dragons, cannot simply be killed in the normal way. So the solution had to be the same as well, and recovering it required reaching back through time. High on the throat of the world there is a place called the Time Wound, a spot where the ancient heroes' use of the Elder Scroll had worn the fabric of time thin, leaving a kind of scar. By reading that same Elder Scroll at that exact spot, the last Dragonborn was able to look directly back into the past, to witness the original heroes battling Alduin in the Dragon War, and to learn from them, across the gulf of thousands of years, the lost and forbidden shout called Dragonrend. There is something worth pausing on in that. Dragonrend, remember, works by forcing the raw concept of mortality, the understanding of death and ending, into the mind of an immortal dragon, an idea so foreign to a piece of the deathless time god that it cripples them. So the weapon the last Dragonborn had to learn, the only thing that could bring Alduin down, was essentially a way of teaching a god what it means to die. A mortal, a creature shaped entirely by the fact that it ends, shouting the truth of ending so forcefully into the World Eater that the destroyer of worlds is staggered by his first taste of his own potential mortality. Armed with that, the Dragonborn and Paarthurnax confronted Alduin at the peak of the mountain and fought him to a standstill, forcing him down out of the sky, but it still was not enough to finish him. Exactly as it had not been enough for the ancient heroes. Alduin broke off and fled, and where he fled is the strangest part of the whole pursuit, because the World Eater ran to the land of the dead. Alduin escaped to Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife, the great hall where the honored dead of Skyrim feast for eternity, and he did not flee there simply to hide. He went there to feed and to grow strong, because Alduin had been doing something monstrous to the souls of the dead. He had cast a great snare across Sovngarde, a thick choking mist, and he was trapping and devouring the souls of dead Nords as they arrived, swallowing the honored dead whole to fuel his return. The afterlife itself was being eaten. So, to finish him, the last Dragonborn had to die into that realm, or rather, find the one doorway to it, which meant something almost no living mortal had ever done, traveling bodily into the land of the dead. The only way in was through an ancient portal at a ruined temple that only the dragons could reach, so the Dragonborn did something fitting for the theme of this whole story. They trapped a dragon. Using a shout, the Dragonborn lured and captured a powerful dragon named Odahviing, pinning him down, and in exchange for freedom, Odahviing agreed to carry the Dragonborn on his back to the hidden portal. So the Dragonborn flew into the land of the dead on the back of a bent and beaten dragon, fought through the temple guarding the gateway, and crossed over into Sovngarde itself, into Alduin's killing mist. And there was a guardian waiting on the threshold, which tells you something about how seriously the gods take a living person walking into the realm of the dead. To reach the great hall where the honored dead gather, you have to cross a bridge made of whalebone, and that bridge is guarded by Tsun, the old Nordic god of trials and hardship, who in life was the shield thane and protector of shore, the chief god of the Nords. Tsun does not simply wave the Dragonborn through. He demands to know by what right a living mortal dares to enter the land of the dead at all, and then he forces the Dragonborn to prove that right the only way the warrior dead understand, which is to fight him, god against Dragonborn, on the edge of the bridge. Only after the Dragonborn holds their own against the literal god thus soon stand aside and judge them worthy to cross. And soon let's slip something important while he is at it. The heroes inside have been straining to charge out and attack Alduin themselves for ages, ever since he first set his soul snare in their afterlife. But Shor, the chief god, held them back, restrained their fury, almost as if he had foreseen that the right one would eventually come, and that this was a fight meant for a Dragonborn, and no one else. Even in the Hall of the Dead, the world was waiting for the specific being our whole investigation has been circling. Inside, the Dragonborn found the Great Hall of the Heroic Dead, with the empty throne of Shor himself standing at the head of it, and there, waiting, were the three ancient Nord heroes from the very beginning of this story: Gormlaith Golden Hilt, Hakon One Eye, and Felder the Old, the same three who had banished Alduin in the Dragon War thousands of years before, now long dead and dwelling in the afterlife they had once saved. The mighty mist that Alduin used to trap souls could be torn apart by the voice, and so the last Dragonborn and the three ancient heroes stood together and shouted as one, four masters of the Thuum across two different ages of the world, and ripped the World Eater's snare to shreds, exposing him at last. And then they fought him, the four of them together, the newest Dragonborn and the oldest heroes, and this time, with Dragonrend forcing mortality into him and four legends bearing down at once, Alduin the World Eater finally fell. He thrashed and raged, unable to comprehend his own defeat, and came apart into a black and gold ruin. But here is the detail that almost everyone misses, and it is one of the most important details in the entire lore for our question, so do not skip past it. When Alduin died, his soul was not absorbed by the last Dragonborn. Every other dragon the Dragonborn kills surrenders its soul. That is the whole defining trait we have been building on since the first minute of this video, but not Alduin. His soul was not taken, and the lore openly says he may not have been completely destroyed at all, that he might one day return. And once you understand what Alduin actually is, that makes a terrible kind of sense. Alduin is not just a dragon. He is the World Eater, the destruction that is built into the design of reality, the one whose true purpose is to end the world when its time comes so the next world can begin. You cannot truly absorb that. You cannot make the end of the world permanently dead, because the world does, eventually, have to end. All the Dragonborn really did was stop Alduin from ending it now, before its time, the way he was wrongly trying to. The function he represents could not be destroyed, only postponed, which is going to bring us, at last, to the unsettling part. But before the first Dragonborn and the last one could stand face to face, the last Dragonborn had to pay a price to get there, and that price is worth telling on its own, because it shows you the cost that tends to follow this gift around, and it gives us one more witness who says out loud what a Dragonborn is actually for. Miraak, remember, was no ordinary opponent. He was the original, thousands of years old, and he had spent all that time soaking in the power of Hermaeus Mora's endless library. To even stand a chance against him, the last Dragonborn needed a particular shout, the same one Mora had given Miraak at the very beginning, the shout called Bend Will, that lets its user override the will of dragons and men and even the land itself. And the only being who could teach it was Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge, the same patron who had owned Miraak for all those ages. So, the last Dragonborn went into the library to bargain with the exact creature that had created the problem in the first place, which is rarely a safe thing to do. Mora handed over the first parts of the shout readily enough, the way a dealer gives away a free sample, but he held the final word back and he named his price. He wanted the secret knowledge of the Skal, a small, isolated people living on the island of Solstheim who had spent untold generations keeping their wisdom out of his reach. The Skal were one of the last pockets of knowledge in the world that Mora did not own, and he wanted them badly. The keeper of that knowledge was their shaman, an old man named Storn Cragstrider, and the one carrying the request to him was Storn's own daughter, Freya, who had been fighting at the Dragonborn's side, so the choice landed on a father and his daughter. If Storn refused, Miraak could not be stopped and the island stayed enslaved. If Storn agreed, he had to hand his people's soul over to a demon they had resisted for centuries. What makes this land so hard is what the skull secret actually was. It was not some weapon or spell or hidden hoard of power. When you ask about it in the game, you learn that their guarded knowledge was the art of living in balance with the land, how to speak to the wind and listen to the earth, a gentle inheritance about harmony that was the complete opposite of everything the grasping, hoarding Prince of Forbidden Knowledge stood for, and Storn chose to give it up anyway. He opened the forbidden book that summons Mora, told the prince he would share the secrets, and Mora reached into the old man's mind and tore the knowledge out of him by force, killing him in front of his daughter and his whole village in the process. The Dragonborn just had to stand there and watch it happen, because there was no other road to Mirak. In exchange for a man's life and a people's heritage, Mora handed over the last word of the shout, and added a cold little remark that the Dragonborn would now either defeat Mirak or replace him as his new champion, as fate decided. And here is the line that matters most for our whole question, delivered by a grieving daughter standing over her father's body. Freya, in her sorrow, warns the Dragonborn that the path of Hermaeus Mora is not what the Allmaker, the skull name for the source of creation, intended when the Dragonborn was made. Sit with that, because a character inside the story has just stated the thesis of this entire video out loud. The Dragonborn was made for a purpose, by the source of creation, and that purpose is not to serve some hungry prince of secrets and not to hoard power for its own sake. It is something cleaner and older than that, and a simple shaman's daughter on a frozen island understands it better than all the emperors with their amulets ever did. The gift comes from the divine. It is meant for the protection of the world, and it can be twisted, and when it is twisted there is always a price, and the price is usually paid by someone good. Storn Cragstrider paid it so that the World Eater's first servant could finally be put down. But before that, we get to close the loop that opened thousands of years ago with Mirak, because the very first Dragonborn and the very last one end up standing face to face, and the way it resolves is the perfect punctuation on the entire definition. Remember that Mirak never truly died. He had been pulled into the endless library of Hermaeus Mora and trapped there, scheming the whole time to find his way back into the world. And the return of the dragons and the appearance of a brand new Dragonborn finally gave him his opening. He began reaching out from his prison, taking control of the people of the island of Solstheim, the very island his own ancient battle had torn loose from the mainland, bending them to his will in their sleep to build him a road back to life. He even sent followers to hunt down and kill the last Dragonborn, branding them a false Dragonborn, because in Mirak's ancient mind there could only ever be one true one, and it was him. So the last of them traveled to Solstheim, and then into the endless library of forbidden knowledge to confront the first of them, and the two Dragonborn met and fought at the summit of that impossible realm, the oldest and the newest, separated by an entire span of recorded history, but made at the level of the soul of the exact same divine stuff. Mirak had spent thousands of years hoarding power, and he fully intended to consume the last Dragonborn's soul to finally break his chains and return to the world as master of his own fate. But at the decisive moment, his own ancient master betrayed him. Hermaeus Mora, who had kept Mirak as his champion for all those thousands of years, had simply decided he preferred the new Dragonborn, and he reached into his own realm and killed Mirak himself, casually, mid-battle, the very instant Mirak stopped being useful to him, and the soul of the first Dragonborn, carrying everything he had gathered across the ages, finally came apart and poured into the last one. The oldest Dragonborn in all of history ended in the exact same way an ordinary dragon ends, by having his soul absorbed by another Dragonborn. The definition we started this whole video with, all the way back in the first minute, turned out to apply even to the man who invented it. The first Dragonborn became fuel for the last. There is one more piece of evidence to put on the table before we draw the conclusion, and it is the most direct of all of them, because it does not come from a dusty book or an old prophecy. It comes from a dragon, looking the Dragonborn in the eye and telling them plainly what they are. High on the throat of the world, the old dragon Parthernax, the one who turned against Alduin and taught mortals the voice, has spent thousands of years living as a hermit and a monk, fighting a private war that almost nobody knows about. And at a certain point in the story, he says something to the Dragonborn that reframes the entire game. He explains that dragons were made to dominate, that the will to power runs in their very blood, that it is the deepest urge of their kind to bend everything around them to their will. And then he turns it on the Dragonborn directly and asks whether they feel that same urge in themselves, because he knows they do. He tells the Dragonborn that he himself has only ever held his own nature in check through endless meditation and study, and that not a single day passes without the temptation to fall back into what he truly is rising up in him again. He even leaves the Dragonborn with a question that hangs over the whole thing, asking what is better, to be born good or to overcome an evil nature through tremendous effort. Now read that the way our investigation has taught us to read it. Parthernax is not speaking in vague poetry. He is a dragon, a fragment of Akatosh, telling another fragment of Akatosh that they share the same blood and the same buried hunger to rule. He is not warning the Dragonborn about some outside enemy. He is warning them about themselves, because he recognizes his own nature sitting inside this mortal, the same way the Akaviri recognized Reman and the Greybeards recognized Tiber Septim. This is the thesis of the whole video, confirmed out loud by one of the oldest living dragons in the world. The Dragonborn and the dragon are the same kind of creature, carrying the same divine appetite, and the only thing that separates a Parthernax from an Alduin or a hero from a tyrant is whether that shared hunger gets mastered or gets obeyed. And this casts a long shadow back over every Dragonborn we have looked at, because it means the gift was always double-edged. Mirak felt that hunger and let it run, and it turned him from a servant of the dragons into a would-be conqueror who ended up enslaved by a Daedric prince for his trouble. Tiber Septim felt it and conquered an entire continent, becoming a god, but also, by some accounts, a ruthless one who did terrible things to get there. The last Dragonborn feels it too, which is the entire reason the game keeps offering them darker and darker sources of power and watching to see whether they reach for them. The dragon blood does not come with a guarantee that you will be good. It comes with the same will to dominate that made the dragons into tyrants in the first place, and it dares every single person who carries it to do better than the World Eater did. The gift and the curse are the exact same thing. A piece of the god of time awake inside a mortal, wanting what dragons want, waiting to see what the mortal will do with it. So now we lay every piece of evidence out on the table and see what is actually left standing, because we have now tested every theory this question usually gets answered with and watched almost all of them collapse. It is not heredity. We know that for certain, because the most honest text in the setting lists the proof out loud, and because the three greatest royal Dragonborn, Alessia's successors, Reman, Cyrodiil, and Tiber Septim, share no proven bloodline at all, and because the last Dragonborn appeared with no royal blood whatsoever after the entire bloodline had already died out and ended forever with Martin Septim. A child can apparently inherit the gift from a Dragonborn parent in some cases, which is the only reason the hereditary idea ever took hold, but Dragonborn keep appearing with no Dragonborn parent at all, so blood is at most one door among several, never the cause. It is not the throne, and it is not the amulet either. Those were tools of the Covenant, the machinery for putting a Dragonborn to work holding the gates of oblivion shut, but the last Dragonborn never touched an amulet and never sat a throne, and was every bit as real and as powerful as the emperors who did both. And it is not the voice, because the voice is a teachable skill that ordinary mortals can learn through decades of grinding study. And a trained master of the Tuum is still not a Dragonborn, no matter how thunderous their shout becomes. Mirak proved that at the very dawn of the whole thing, when the heroes who could already shout still came crawling to him for the one thing only he had. When you sweep all of that off the table, exactly one answer is left. And it is the same one the oldest and most honest text on the subject landed on after its own investigation. A Dragonborn is a mortal who has been given a piece of Akatosh, the god of time and the father of dragons, placed directly into their soul. That single thread connects every example we have looked at, with nothing left over. The dragons are splinters of Akatosh, which is the entire reason a Dragonborn can take a dragon's soul into themselves and hold it without being destroyed. Because at the level of the soul, the Dragonborn and the dragon are the same kind of thing, two fragments of the same god. Alessia was given blood drawn straight from Akatosh's own heart. Martin Septim, in his final act, did not merely symbolize Akatosh, he literally became his avatar and fought a Daedric prince in his shape. And that only worked because the dragon blood sealed inside the amulet was Akatosh's own divine power. The amulet itself could physically tell a true Dragonborn from a pretender, refusing to stay on the neck of anyone without the blood, because that blood is a real, detectable piece of a god. And the last Dragonborn could devour the soul of a dragon, of resurrected dragons, even of Mirak, the first Dragonborn, all for the exact same single reason. The blessing was never in the family. It is in the soul, and the soul is on loan, directly, from the god himself. This is why the lore keeps insisting that the gift is a divine mystery, and that mortals cannot understand how or why it gets bestowed. It is not bestowed by parents, and it is not bestowed by law, and it is not earned through training. It is bestowed by Akatosh, personally, by his own choice, and a god is under no obligation to explain his choices or to follow anyone's family tree. He spends a piece of himself, places it into a mortal, and that mortal becomes Dragonborn. Which means the genuinely honest answer to who decides whether you are Dragonborn is not your bloodline, and not your effort, and not your birth. It is the god of time choosing. And once you actually accept that answer, a few things sitting underneath it start to look strange in a way that is genuinely hard to shake off, and they are the real reward for going this deep. The first is that it makes the Dragonborn and the dragons into the same creature. We are trained by the games to think of the Dragonborn as the great enemy of dragonkind, the Dragon Slayer, the one being that dragons truly fear above all else. But by the lore's own logic, they are not opposites at all. A dragon is a fragment of Akatosh poured into the body of a dragon. A Dragonborn is a fragment of Akatosh poured into the body of a mortal. They are siblings, made from the very same divine source, just decanted into different shells. When the last Dragonborn stands over a dead dragon and pulls its soul inside, that is not really a hunter killing a monster. That is one shard of the time god absorbing another shard of the time god back into itself. The dragons themselves seem to grasp this, which is why so many of them speak to the Dragonborn almost like family, with a mix of contempt and recognition, because on some level a dragon looking at a Dragonborn is looking at one of its own kind wearing the wrong skin. Every dragon you have ever killed in that game was, in a sense, your brother. The second strange thing is the pattern the Greybeards understood all along, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. A Dragonborn does not appear when the world is calm and safe. Look at the whole sweep of history we just walked through. Mirak appeared when dragons ruled the world as cruel gods. Alessia was blessed when humanity was enslaved and on the very edge of being wiped out. Tiber Septim rose during an age of total chaos and shattered kingdoms. And the last Dragonborn appeared at the exact moment the World Eater himself returned to literally consume reality. The Dragonborn shows up when the world is about to end, every single time, without exception, which means the gift is not a reward and it is not a prize for being special. It is far closer to an immune response. When the mortal world takes a wound deep enough to kill it, Akatosh spends a piece of his own soul and drops it into a mortal body to go fight off whatever is causing the wound. The Dragonborn is, in plain terms, what the god of time does when his creation is dying. You are never a chosen hero in the warm and flattering sense, but something closer to an emergency measure, an antibody with a sword. And the third thing, the one that sits at the very bottom of all of it, is the price, and it is the reason Alduin's soul was never absorbed. Akatosh is the god of time, and the destruction of the world at the end of its cycle, carried out by Alduin the World Eater, is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. The world is meant to end so that the next one can begin, and the wheel is meant to keep turning. So, when the last Dragonborn defeated Alduin, the lore is openly, deliberately unsure whether that was actually the right thing to do, or whether the Dragonborn, by refusing to let the world end on its proper schedule, only postponed something that still, eventually, has to happen. That is precisely why Alduin's soul could not be taken, and why he may yet return, because you cannot kill the end of the world, you can only make it wait. Even the prophecy itself does not end on a clean victory. It ends on a turning, the wheel turning upon the last Dragonborn, which is a strange and open and slightly ominous way to describe the triumph of a hero. Nobody in the entire setting, not the scholars, not the silent monks, not even the dragons, can tell you for certain whether the Dragonborn ultimately saved the world or merely delayed its rightful death by buying it one more turn of the wheel. So, after all of that, what actually makes a Dragonborn? Not a bloodline, because the greatest of them shared none. Not a crown, because the last of them never wore one. Not the voice, because that can be taught to anyone patient enough to spend a lifetime learning it. What makes a Dragonborn is a single decision made by the god of time to take a piece of his own soul, the very same substance he pours into his dragons, and place it inside a mortal at the exact moment the world needs it most. The emperors with their amulets, and the slave queen who freed her people, and the war hero who became a god, and the silent stranger who walked into Whiterun and swallowed a dragon's soul in front of the guards, were never one family, and were never even one kind of person. They were the same gift, handed out again and again across the ages, to whoever Akatosh happened to choose. The oldest and most respected book ever written on the subject admitted, honestly, that it could not explain how or why that choice gets made, and after walking through every single example the lore gives us, that turns out to be the only truthful answer there is. A Dragonborn is not born, and a Dragonborn is not made. A Dragonborn is chosen by a god for a world that is about to end, and the one thing they all truly share is that a living piece of the Father of Dragons is awake inside them, waiting to be needed.